Do people ever change? No, they don't. That's what we're going to talk about today in 1 Corinthians 10. Well, in the end, people are people. And that's why these stories that are thousands of years ago resonate to us today. Hi, this is Jill from the Northwoods talking about Bible chapters one small step at a time. This chapter starts out, like I said, big long letter that we've been talking about sin. We've been talking about meat. We've been talking about this church that is having certain numbers of problems. And he said that the people in Exodus were under a cloud, meaning the cloud of God. While they were in Exodus, remember, God led them through the desert and then to pass through the sea, and the sea was split, and they were able to escape the Egyptians. All that means is that they were baptized at that point into Moses in this cloud and in the sea. And we won't get into it, but the idea is that God always, we're in a hardship. God promises us to take us out of the hardship. We're in the wilderness, and then we're removed from the wilderness, right? And then we are brought to a place. And that was it. They had in Exodus to go through. God could have just taken them out of Egypt and plopped them down in the Holy Land, and he didn't. They went through. They went through the sea. They went through the desert. And this was a baptism through Moses. Not salvation-wise, but spiritually. They are baptized into this covenant with Moses. And in this whole piece, we are all in a covenant with God. Changes with Jesus, to be sure, but it is still a covenant, and we are all part of the same God. We were part of the God in Exodus, in Abraham, and now we're with God in a new covenant with Jesus. So that imagery of water and clouds, water, the sea, water. And it says that they ate spiritual food and drank spiritual drink. And when you think of it, it's beyond this concept, the way that Jesus talked about it, where he is the bread of life, he is the living water. They were eating water that, if you remember, Moses struck a rock, and water, never-ending water, came out of this rock, and it went, every time they went someplace and struck a rock, water came out, and then food, manna, was always presented to them. So this was going to be a constant providing from God while they were in the desert, while they had this miracle cloud, these miracle rocks. They walked through the sea. They were fed and watered. And what happened is that they started to fall away. They started to become idolaters, even though these miracles are happening all around them. Moses was gone for a hot second, and suddenly there's a golden calf. And they became idolaters. And even Aaron, who was like, no, it's not a super great idea. And he thought, well, maybe I could guide their ill intentions towards God, but it still wasn't the right kind of thing. And they just learned about a lot of different pagan gods while they were in Egypt. They knew of them because of the area itself. There were many different kinds of cults going on. And this is going to relate to the people in Rome and those who had knowledge of the Greek. It was just all very pagan types of worship. And it was interesting because I remember when I was in college, someone said, well, we never even found a golden calf in all of Israel. This story is suspect. And then the year after I was in my archaeological dig in Israel, my dig site found a carved calf and then found more of them. So it was actually a cultic item that was worshipped during that time. And you think about the Egyptians, you had, I think it was Horus, the she goddess, or Hathor. Is it Hathor? Hathor, the goddess, and they probably walked out of there with those types of worship, coming from Egypt for hundreds of years. So it probably rubbed off on them a little bit of ways. Or was it the Moabite women that they were encountering along the way that lured them into worshiping a golden calf or becoming sexually immoral, and that's in the end. That God said that they were put to the test, and it didn't work out well. And when we're put to the test, it doesn't always work out for us too. And the Exodus people when they were in Egypt and leaving Egypt, they started to grumble, fall away, fall into this trap. And you look at us now, we're not any better. We might not worship golden calves, but we worship other things. We worship money and fame and fortune. There is a book called American Gods, which I don't recommend reading because it's quite R-rated, but it was a science fiction book. And the idea was that gods got power by how many people worship them. And now we had new gods, money, entertainment, power, and they are the new gods, and they are powerful beyond any other gods that ever existed. And they were going back to kill all the other old gods because they lacked power now. It's the idea, and it's a commentary on our society today. So maybe we're not carving up idols, but we're carving up different kinds of idols. Maybe we're carving up the images of beautiful people or rich people or powerful people, or I want that stuff. I want to go on that vacation to Bali. There is something that we are worshiping, and it might not look like their idols, either in Exodus or the idols that were hitting them in Corinth, but they are there all the same. So anyway, just kind of keep that in mind. And so then Moses, like I said, leaves for a little bit, and everyone's like, hey, let's worship a golden calf. And we just do the same darn thing. And so, and the other opposite way of things is that people will believe in God, and then they will start to pray for something. God, give me this family or this house or this job or something I really wanted. And then it doesn't happen, or maybe something even worse. And people then just stop believing in God. And then their belief in nothingness is their God. So in the end, we're not any better. We fall into the same temptations. And then Paul says that basically you're falling into temptations that's common to man. We fall into the same traps over and over again. These gods that existed back in the day, it was about sex and sacrificing children and praying for rain so that they could get crops. And they were quick to fall into them, but so are we. The ancient gods, the modern gods, none of them are real. None of them exist, but worshiping other gods is demonic, the actual worship of it. And so he says he doesn't want you, to be overtaken, that he wants them to be faithful to God. God is faithful to us. And then he says something that oftentimes gets misinterpreted quite a bit. It says that you won't be tempted beyond your ability. Very famous passage. In NIV, it says that God will not tempt you beyond what you can bear. God is not tempting us. The world and demons and whatever is tempting us. And people will come out with that. And first of all, someone talked to me about this, saying that it's communal. That means us as a people. But the other part of it is, too, this is about temptation. And people will say, well, I fell into temptation. Guess God tempted me more than I could handle. First of all, there's always a way out. It says that God always gives us a way out. And it doesn't say that these temptations are going to be easy to avoid, easy on us to avoid, but God will always provide escape a route so that you may endure whatever temptation is coming your way. So there's always that escape, and it's always, this is specifically about temptation of sin. There is a path out. And many times, the problem is people want to be tempted beyond what they can handle. And so they don't look for the way out. I remember, I was in college, I belonged to a sports team, and we would travel all over all over the United States doing this sports. And there was someone on the team who was a Christian, and she would get drunk and then go sleep with a bunch of men that she would meet during these tours. And then she'd come back and say, oh, man, this is just so terrible. I got so drunk. This is so awful. And it just happened over and over again. And I said to someone on the team, I said, well, she seems to be really broken up about it. Should we help her? Should we, prevent her from drinking or prevent her from, take her back to the hotel so she doesn't do this? Because she seems pretty lamentful for it. And this is when I wasn't a Christian. And someone on the team says, oh, no, that's just an excuse. She just says that so that she doesn't look terrible, or that you don't think poorly of her. And she didn't want a way out. she would use this method as a way of doing the things she wanted to do, and she looked at drinking as a way in as compared to God, who was trying to show her a way out. Like I said, I don't know, but that's the idea when I think about this passage. God won't let you be tempted by sin without giving you a way that you can endure it. And so then he says, flee from idolatry. He tells us to flee from sin. Idolatry is worshiping other gods, whether they're gods or not really gods, but you are worshiping something else. He said it before in this particular chapter. And you think about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. So when we talk about temptation, so then when you think about fleeing sin, think about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. He was being tempted. This rich, powerful woman wanted him, and he fled. He fled to the point where the clothes stayed here and he went there. When we go to a bar, when we go and gamble, when we know it's something that might tempt us, whenever we're in something that may tempt us in a certain direction, we have to think, flee. How can I flee this? How can I not fall into this trap? How can I pray to God that I will not be put in a position where I will fall into this trap? And you do it with prayer, with asking God for help, and not putting yourself into those situations. If you are an alcoholic, don't go into that bar. If you are someone who is addicted to gambling, don't go into that establishment. Just stay out. Go find something else to do that day. But like I said, it starts with prayer. It starts with asking God and the Holy Spirit for strength. So that's the idea. And we're just not as good as we think we are. So he is saying, and I thought it was nice, he called them, and this was nice. He said that the cup of blessing, that's going to be the blood of Christ. That's going to be, what we see in communion. That is where Jesus' blood was talked about while he was still alive. He talked about communion. And the idea is that, in communion, it's more than just communion. It's partially communion and mostly with God. But it is communion with each other. And back in those days, what they would do is they almost had like a potluck style meal, that they would have a meal together, and then they would do communion together as a group. It was a bit more like what Jesus did at the Passover meal. And he's saying it here. We're all one body. We're all one blood. We all partake in it together. Let us flee from sin. And think about those people in Israel who did very similar things, would sacrifice on the altar of God, and then would eat the meat that was left over. That was them participating not just in a sacrifice, but also participating in a communal meal where they got to share in that sacrifice together. And that's the idea. And if you go into a meal, into another temple, you're worshiping demons. You might think there are other gods. And I was thinking about this, that I wonder if many of the ancient other gods were manifested demons. But even if they're not, even if they're just pieces of wood and silver and something that some person made up, or, I got lucky one day and I invented a god, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you are worshiping a demon or you are worshiping a piece of wood. Your mere idolatrous worship in another temple, worshiping another god, is demonic. And that's what he's saying right here. I don't want you doing that. You want to be communed together in Christ, not with other people in other temples worshiping other gods. And it doesn't even matter if a person says, well, I went in there and I worshiped in this other temple. I didn't believe any of it. I was just there. Doesn't matter. You are participating in a sacrifice. You're eating meat as part of this sacrifice, just like we're eating and participating in communion. That's what you're doing right here. You are actually doing something demonic because you are going through. This is different than just going to a market and buying meat that someone says was sacrificed to another god. Now you're actually participating in it and provoking God to jealousy. I remember I went to India a few years ago, and I went with a coworker, and he wanted to go into a Hindu temple and leave an offering there. And I wanted to see inside the temple for sure because, I've never been to India before, but I wasn't gonna step foot in there, because then at that point when you step foot in there, you also have to bring an offering, which they sell you at the door. Nope. And so I waited outside and I'm not going to go anywhere near that. So in the end, God is stronger, than we are. And the difference between eating meat that was sacrificed in the name of a god when you got at a meat market and participating in a temple, that's a whole other thing. And it's always been a big temptation for us. It is always I think that even if you didn't want to participate in these sacrifices or go to these temples, we try to belong, we try to fit in. We don't want to feel left out. Think about going to a marriage, going to a wedding, right, in another temple. And if you are participating in that, it's the worship of demons. It is a demonic type of activity. And so God says not to do that. And I don't know. It's the same thing. Eve fell away. Adam fell away at the very beginning, abandoned God, decided to follow Satan, and it takes a different form every generation. And these other gods, these other demons, they demand worship. You're going to be doing something and you're going to start running into trouble. That's the idea. You're going to start running into trouble when you do that, whether or not, like I said, those gods exist or not. So anyway, that's just the idea of it. Paul wants you all to stay away from this. Flee from temptation. And of course, anyone who, is observing this will recognize at that point, I can't go any further. This is not the faith of Jesus Christ. This is a step too far. And you have no physical law preventing you from doing it. And you know that you love God. I love God, and I want to please him with my life and actions. And that's what Paul is, worshiping people away from that. And I was thinking about this in terms, that, like I said, there's Greek gods and Roman gods, Moabite gods. And these people were living in an area with temples. This town had a temple to Athena. And most of the people are still worshipers of these pagan gods. And this is a small community of people who became Christians. And you wonder if they just wanted to fit in, if they maybe would lose their banking job if they didn't fit in. Maybe they would lose prestige in the town if they didn't fit in. So he's trying to compare this. And that's why this message is coming through to them. Don't do that. Don't do any of those things that you're thinking about. And maybe that's what they were doing. But when it comes to us, our idolatries in our world are a little bit different and a little bit more, like I said, philosophical. We need to stay away from it, just like he's telling them to stay away from it. Hope that sounded clear. What I'm going to meditate on this week is, what am I idolatrizing? What am I worshiping with my mind? Is it money? Is it, some people, their bodies and their physical health, their something. There's always something. And someone said that if you were to write down every time you spent time doing something and that you spent money doing something, that would tell you probably where your idolatry is pointed towards. And so I want to make sure that I'm clear on that I understand what I fall away with, what I want and put my focus and my money and my time towards. I can tell that in some sense. When I think about it, it's for me security. I grew up in a completely insecure place, and so when I start feeling insecure about money or insecure about something going on with this house or something going on with my health, I get worried. And it's kind of, it seems like the opposite. What causes me to worry is maybe what I am idolizing. So I'm going to reflect on that and just try to see what is it, does idolatry look like in the modern world? What is it dressed like? What is its image? And try to avoid that. And what I'm going to pray about is the idea that God always keeps me strong, lets me know whenever it is I'm at that metaphysical temple, when there's a bridge that's too far, when there's a place that I can't go any further in that. praying for spiritual discernment between, conviction and then having the courage and then recognizing the fine line in participation, particularly in morally ambiguous situations. It gets hard, it gets real fuzzy. Well, should I gamble? Well, I mean, it's probably fine, put $5 in the slot machine for my one night in Las Vegas. Or is it leading me down the wrong path? That's why we need spiritual discernment. And what I'm going to share with others is that God is a jealous God. It's not a jealousy that we think of when we would call a spouse or a boyfriend jealous. It's almost like a tarnishing thing, like, oh, you're just jealous, that kind of thing. It doesn't look good on the other person. It doesn't look good on us either. But what it means as a jealous God is that he is trying to keep us from things that are going to be very damaging and very dangerous for us so that we don't participate in any way with whatever it is this modern idolatry looks like. In some ways, it feels like it looked more clear back in pagan ancient times. Oh, nope, not doing that. Oh, I see that person is worshiping that God, not going to do that. Now, like I said, I think it's more insidious now. It's harder to dissect. And so when you're participating in religion without a religious name, it's important to draw that line. So that's really important when we take a look at it. We're confronted with these truths between Exodus 20 and the Exodus and 1 Corinthians 10. It challenges us to think critically about the culture and about the activities that are going on around in the world around us. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you watching. I hope that helps clear it up. If you have anything to say to me, or maybe I got something right, or maybe I got something wrong, or maybe I made you think, you can put a comment right here in the video chat, or you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I would love to hear from you, even if you just say hi. Remember to subscribe and tell a friend. And I just hope you have a really great day.